My name is Shrenik Koppaka, and I did The Man of Will for my Korean 3415 project. For some general information, this movie was directed and written by Lee Won-tae and produced by Kim Yong-ho. And this movie stars Cho Jin-woong as Kim Chang-soo, better known as Kim Gu, and Song Seung-hoon as Kang Hyun-sik. This movie was released on October 19, 2017, and made $2.7 million in the box office. So this movie was a biographical drama of the Korean independence activist Kim Gu. He was mostly known for being the head of the Korean provisional government in Shanghai, but he was first kind of known because he committed murder in 1896 and got caught. But once he was imprisoned, he started teaching the inmates at the prison about reading and writing Hangul. And he would go on to become imprisoned two more times, and he got tortured on his third imprisonment, and that is when he decided to change his name to Kim Gu after that. He also participated in the March 1st movement, which was a series of protests against Japan and is widely recognized as the first or as an event of the Korean independence movement. But that movement resulted in violent suppression from the Japanese government, which led to the creation of the provisional government in Shanghai. And finally, he was assassinated, but he became a well respected figure with a strong legacy as he was credited for establishing South Korea, and he was succeeded by Ri Seung Man. The movie first starts off with Kim Chang Soo fighting and killing a Japanese guy who he thought participated in the assassination of Empress Myeongsong. There, he leaves a note confessing to his crime, and 5 months later, we see that he is taken to a prison. From the beginning, we see that the prisoners are shown rough treatment from the prison guards and the warden. And although they weren't actually Japanese, they're Koreans who basically work for Japan and are loyal to Japan. For example, one of the old prisoners got severely beat for coughing when the warden was talking, and Kim Chang-soo was also beat and not given food for 3 days because he claimed not to be a criminal since he wasn't actually convicted yet. And as you can see, the prison guards are dragging him while he is injured. So we can fast forward a little bit and we see Kim Chang-soo in court claiming that he killed someone because he was armed and tried to kill him. So that's why he had suspicion that he participated in the assassination of the empress. But regardless of Kim Chang-soo's appeal, the court gives him the max sentence. And here we kind of see the influence of Japan and Japan's imperialism on Korea, because even though the Joseon court should be the highest authority in terms of law and should be fair, they gave Kim Chang-soo an unfair penalty just because the guy he killed was Japanese and Japanese authorities were present. So the audience really recognizes that it's the Japanese who are in power at this point. Going back to the prison, on the screen we see Ma Sang-gu, and Ma Sang-gu beats up Kim Chang-soo because he is kind of trying not to act up by not eating, which seems to be belittling the other prisoners who are trying their best to survive every day. Ma Sang-soo says that he's not valuing life and doesn't understand what it really means to die. And after getting beat up by Ma Sang-soo and witnessing a suicide, Mr. Ko actually gives Kim Chang-soo a lecture about how many people died because they're not actually literate because they can't read. And he lectures him to not just sit around and wait to die in prison. Um, he talks about how most of the prisoners didn't receive trials, like Ma Sang-gu, who we saw before, who was actually framed, but because he's not literate, he couldn't really petition to court for a proper trial. And Mr. Ko also mentions how the prisoners are stuck just like the flower blooming in prison, and they aren't able to bloom and show their potential in prison. Also, because they're not literate and because they're just stuck doing labor, even if they were falsely accused. So Mr. Ko kind of tries to get a point across that Kim Chang Soo should be useful before he dies, and this sort of brings some change in Kim Chang Soo, at least in his mindset, about what he should do here and how he should spend his time in prison. So Kim Chang Soo finally tells Ma Sang-gu that he will help him stand trial in court and finally takes a bite of the food. And this is where the story kind of actually starts. Kim Chang Soo starts to teach Ma Sang-gu about writing, and Ma Sang-gu writes a petition to the court with the help of Chang Soo, but the prison guard hides it, and this fact will be important later on. So the petition for Ma Sang-gu never actually reaches the court. Chang Soo starts to become a influential figure in prison after writing to help one of the prison guards to get his land back. He is given food to share with the other prisoners, and he starts to help other prisoners stand trial and be free if they're unjustly imprisoned. However, the good atmosphere ends when Mr. Ko, who is on death row, is finally executed. But because of this, Kim Chang Soo is just more determined to make a difference, and he carries on the teaching of Mr. Ko. So he decides to open a school in prison, and now the prisoners are able to send letters to their family after continuous practice and learning. At this point, some Japanese high-ranking officials get word that the prisoners are writing and sending letters, but they want the construction of the railroad to be accomplished, and they believe that they're not going to agree to work if they're sending these letters. So the warden learns of this and he's furious. So he finds out Changsu is the one in charge and beats him and puts him in solitary confinement, which is a small hole underground in the cold winter. Now the prisoners, including Changsu, are forced to be laborers for the railway in harsh conditions, and they face continuous injuries. Some prisoners try to run and escape, but they're just instantly shot and killed. And an incident happens where the scaffolding of the construction site collapses, and Chondong, the young prisoner, as well as the chief prison guard, are buried under the material. Ma Sang-gu decides to save the prison guard even after the harsh treatment he experienced and seeing him shoot and kill other prisoners. And eventually, the chief guard is actually saved, but Ma Sang-gu sacrifices himself and dies. And because of this, the prisoners protest about the harsh working conditions, and the chief guard also feels guilty because he was saved by Ma Sang-gu, but he didn't send his petition to court. So that could have meant that Ma Sang-gu would have already been freed and would have already been alive because he wouldn't have had to sacrifice his life there. But because of the protest, Changsu speaks to the warden, and the warden tries to argue that he's doing things for the betterment of Joseon and Korea, but Changsu knows it's ultimately because of his greed to secure him a good life, to get money, and because he's essentially just exploiting the workers and taking their money, which is illegal. So Changsu strikes a deal to make sure that they have better working conditions and a place, an undisturbed place for him to teach other people and have their school. And everything is good for a good amount of time, but Changsu is soon taken to be executed as he was also on death row. However, we see that Changsu is actually saved by His Majesty's order because the prisoners have sent His Majesty letters about his doings and how he has taught prisoners in Incheon. So His Majesty was impressed by that, and also impressed by the fact that he killed someone who was potentially thought to have assassinated the old empress, which His Majesty always wanted to get revenge for. But Changsu luckily escapes from the execution and is also able to escape because of a prisoner guard who was friendly with prisoners and also learned how to read and write from Changsu, feigned ignorance and said that Changsu wasn't actually there, even though he was. And finally, the warden got caught with his illegal activities due to the chief guard exposing them, and the chief guard is the guy in the middle, and the Joseon court sentences him. And after escaping from prison, we see Kim Chang-soo going on to fight for the independence of Korea. What I learned is that most of the independence fighters went through a lot, and Korean in general also went through a lot underneath Japan's imperial rule. This movie was really my first exposure to the history between Japan and Korea, and I didn't know much before, but I learned about a lot about the relations between the two. Essentially, Japan had all the control over Korea, even though the king was still there, and Japan would justify any crime they committed, and some Koreans would even side with the Japanese to save themselves. For example, the unfairness in imprisoning Koreans without a fair trial, even if they were using false defense, if they were framed, or more. It just showed that a lot of Koreans were treated unfairly, for example, with the labor, beatings, taking advantage of them, etc. But Ma Sang-gu said that even someone like you is no different from us when talking to the Korean chief prison guard. And it also showed me that Korean people were the same, and most of the educated Koreans knew that. They simply wanted to survive, but they had to resort to different actions and be put in different situations to do so. It was mostly because at that time, people just wanted to survive as they were scared of the Japanese and what they would do to them. So they didn't really want to hurt their country or their people. However, there were some Koreans that were like that, and they may get greedy like the warden, to which ideally they should be punished, but during Japan's regime, they really weren't punished and were instead rewarded. Finally, this movie also kind of shows the power of literacy and how it really helps make an impact by connecting people with others and getting things done. We saw that the prisoners were able to send letters to their family, and they were also able to send letters to the king to help prevent the execution. Just shows you how powerful being literate is, and how what Mr. Ko said people die because they aren't literate, that was a real thing, especially at that time. And this sort of literacy is needed to move forward as a country and help fight against Japan. And I think Kim Chung-soo realized this, which is kind of why he was dedicated to the Korean independence movement and wanted to um, found it because he wanted to improve the lives of others by educating people and teaching them that what they're going through right now is not right. And I believe all these experiences that Kim Chung-soo faces and experienced allows him to become this influential figure. And this is common with most famous independence fighters because they're usually the ones who go through a lot and experience a lot in their lives. So essentially, I was able to learn about the harsh conditions and treatments Korean faced under Japanese imperialism, as well as I was able to learn the background on who was behind the Korean independence movement and kind of learn his motive on why he wanted to start this independence movement.